A Wizard of Earthsea, Chapter 2, Part 4. Of the 70 crewmen of the ship, some were like Jed, very young in years, though all had made their passage into manhood. These lads called him over to share food and drink with them, and were friendly, though rough and full of jokes and jibes. They called him Goatherd, of course, because he was Gauntish, but they did not go further than that. He was as tall and strong as the 15-year-olds, and quick to return either a good word or a jeer. So he made his way among them, and even that first night began to live as one of them and learn their work. This suited the ship's officers, for there was no room aboard for idle passengers. There was little enough room for the crew, and no comfort at all in an undecked galley crowded with men and gear and cargo. But what was comfort to Jed? He lay that night among corded rolls of pelts from the northern isles and watched the stars of spring above the harbor waters and the little yellow lights of the city astern, and he slept and waked again, full of delight. Before dawn the tide turned. They raised anchor and rowed softly out between the armed cliffs. As sunrise reddened the mountain of Gaunt behind them, they raised the high sail and ran southwestward over the Gauntish Sea. Between Barnisk and Torhaven they sailed with a light wind, and on the second day came in sight of Havnor, the great island, heart and hearth of the archipelago. For 3 days they were in sight of the green hills of Havnor as they worked along its eastern coast, but they did not come to shore. Not for many years did Jed set foot on that island or see the white towers of Havnor Great Port at the center of the world. They lay over one night at Kembermouth, the northern port of Way Island, and the next at a little town on the entrance of Felquay Bay, and the next day passed the northern cape of O and entered the Ebba the Nor Straits. There they dropped sail and rowed, always with land on either side, and always within hail of other ships, great and small, merchants and traders, some bound in from the outer reaches with strange cargo after a voyage of years, and others that hopped like sparrows from isle to isle of the inmost sea. Turning southward out of the crowded straits, they left Havnor astern and sailed between the two fair islands, Ark and Ilion, towering and terraced with cities, and then through rain and rising wind began to beat their way across the inmost sea to Roke Island. In the night, as the wind freshened to a gale, they took down both sail and mast, and the next day, all day, they rowed. The long ship lay steady on the waves and went gallantly, but the steersman at the long steering sweep in the stern looked into the rain that beat the sea and saw nothing but the rain. They went southwest by the pointing of a magnet, knowing how they went, but not through what waters. Jed heard men speak of the shoal waters of North Roke and of the Borealis rocks to the east. Others argued that they might be far off of course by now, in the empty waters south of Camery. Still the wind grew stronger, tearing the edges of the great waves into flying tatters of foam, and still they rowed southwest with the wind behind them. The stints at the oars were shortened, for the labor was very hard, and the younger lads were set 2 to an oar, and Jed took his turn with the others as he had since they left Gaunt. When they did not row, they bailed, for the seas broke heavy on the ship. So they labored among the waves that ran like smoking mountains under the wind, while the rain beat hard and cold on their backs, and the drum thumped through the noise of the storm like a heart thumping. A man came to take Jed's place at the oar, sending him to the ship's master in the bow. Rainwater dripped from the hem of the master's cloak, but he stood stout as a wine barrel on his bit of decking and looked down at Jed. He asked, "Can you abate this wind, lad?" "No, sir." "No, sir. Have you craft with iron?" He meant, could Jed make the compass needle point their way to Roke, making the magnet follow not its north, but their need. That skill is a secret of the sea masters, and again, Jed must say no. "Well then," the master bellowed through the wind and rain, "you must find some ship to take you back to Roke from Hort Town. Roke must be west of us now, and only wizardry could bring us there through this sea. We must keep south." Jed did not like this, for he had heard the sailors talk of Hort Town, how it was a lawless place full of evil traffic, where men were often taken and sold into slavery in the South Reach. Returning to his labor at the oar, he pulled away with his companion, a sturdy Andradian lad, and heard the drum beat, the stroke, and saw the lantern hung on the stern, bob and flicker as the wind plucked it about, a tormented fleck of light in the rain-slashed dusk. He kept looking westward as often as he could in the heavy rhythm of pulling the oar, and as the ship rose on a high swell, he saw for a moment over the dark, smoking water a light between the clouds, as it might be the last gleam of sunset. But this was a clear light, not red. His oarmate had not seen it, but he called it out. The steersman watched for it on each rise of the great waves, and saw it as Jed saw it again, but shouted back that it was only the setting sun. Then Jed called to one of the lads that was bailing to take his place on the bench a minute, and made his way forward again along the encumbered aisle between the benches, and, catching hold of the carved prow to keep from being pitched overboard, he shouted up to the master, "Sir, that light to the west is Roke Island." "I saw no light," the master roared, but even as he spoke, Jed flung out his arm, pointing, and all saw the light gleam clear in the west over the heaving scud and tumult of the sea. Not for his passenger's sake, but to save his ship from the peril of the storm, the master shouted at once to the steersman to head westward toward the light. But he said to Jed, "Boy, you speak like a sea master, but I tell you, if you lead us wrong in this weather, I'll throw you over to swim to Roke." Now, instead of running before the storm, they must row across the wind's way, and it was hard. Waves, striking the ship abeam, pushed her sideways south of their new course, and rolled her and filled her with water so that bailing must be ceaseless, and the oarsmen must watch lest the ship rolling should lift their oars out of the water as they pulled, and so pitch them down among the benches. It was nearly dark under the storm clouds, but now and again they made out the light to the west, enough to set course by, and so struggled on. At last the wind dropped a little, and the light grew broad before them. They rowed on, and they came, as it were, through a curtain, between one oar stroke and the next, running out of the storm into a clear air, where the light of after sunset glowed in the sky and on the sea. Over the foam-crested waves they saw not far off, a high, round, green hill, and beneath it a town built on a small bay where boats lay at anchor, all in peace. The steersman, leaning on his long sweep, turned his head and called, "Sir, is this true land or a witchery?" "Keep her as she goes, you witless wooden head. Row, you spineless slave sons, that swill bay, and the knoll of Roke, as any fool could see. Row!" So, to the beat of the drum they rowed wearily into the bay. There it was still, so they could hear. There it was still, so they could hear the voices of people up in the town, and a bell ringing, and only far off the hiss and roaring of the storm. Clouds hung dark to the north and east and south, a mile off, all about the island. But over Roke, stars were coming out, one by one, in a clear and quiet sky. Ends chapter 2. Good night, River.